It started with a phone call. The moment his phone lit up, something inside him whispered that this call would change everything. The number was familiar, but long forgotten, a ghost from his past, a remnant of a life he had buried years ago. His heart pounded as he hesitated, his thumb hovering over the screen. Should he answer? The decision was made for him when his phone stopped ringing, and then immediately started again. Whoever it was, they weren't going to give up. With a deep breath, he accepted the call and pressed the phone to his ear. Hello? His voice came out steadier than he expected. There was a pause on the other end. Then, a voice he hadn't heard in years. It's your mother. The word sent a chill down his spine. His mother. The same woman who had looked him in the eye all those years ago and told him to leave. The same woman who had shut the door behind him, sealing his fate without hesitation. And now she was calling him? He swallowed the lump in his throat. What do you want? A sigh. We need to talk. It's important. He almost laughed at that. Now she wanted to talk? After everything? He clenched his jaw, forcing himself to remain calm. Talk about what? Your brother needs your house. The words didn't register at first. He thought maybe he had misheard her. Maybe the years of silence had somehow broken his ability to understand his own mother's voice. My what? His fingers tightened around the phone. Your house, she repeated, as if it were the most natural request in the world. You don't need that place, and your brother is in a difficult situation. You should do the right thing. He almost dropped the phone. A sharp laugh escaped his lips, though there was nothing funny about this. Wait. Let me get this straight. The same family that kicked me out, left me with nothing, and never looked back, now wants my house? Don't be so dramatic. Her tone was sharp, irritated, as if he was the one being unreasonable. We did what we had to do. You were young, you needed to learn responsibility. I was 18, he cut her off, anger bubbling in his chest. You didn't just teach me responsibility, you abandoned me. You threw me out with nothing. And now you have the audacity to, you turned out fine, she interrupted, her voice cold. You have a house, don't you? A good job? We did what was best for you. His vision blurred for a moment, rage clouding his thoughts. And now you want to take that away too. It's for your brother. She said it like it should have been obvious. Like it was the most logical thing in the world. And that was when it all clicked. It had never been about him. It never was. He was always the outsider, the inconvenience, the one they could discard when things got tough. His brother, on the other hand, had always been the golden child. The one who could do no wrong. And now, even after everything, they expected him to give up his home for his brother. His voice was dangerously quiet when he spoke. No silence. Then, an incredulous scoff. Excuse me? You heard me. He felt a strange sense of clarity, like a weight was lifting off his chest. I said no. His mother's voice turned sharp, almost venomous. You selfish little, he ended the call. For a moment, he just stood there, gripping the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white. His heart was hammering in his chest, his breaths uneven. They really had no shame. After all these years, not a single apology. Not a single moment of regret. Just another demand. Another expectation that he would give and they would take. And for the first time in his life, he had said no. The memories came flooding back. He could still feel the cold air on his skin that night, the way the suitcase in his hands had felt impossibly heavy. His father's voice had been firm, unyielding. You need to learn to stand on your own 2 feet. His mother had barely looked at him. His younger brother had stood in the doorway, watching it all like it was some kind of movie. No one had stopped him as he stepped outside. No one had even said goodbye. He had spent his first night in his car, parked outside an old gas station, wondering what he had done to deserve this. He had no money, no job, no plan. Just a single suitcase and the bitter taste of betrayal. For years, he had fought to survive. Working odd jobs, skipping meals to save money, sleeping in shelters when his car wasn't safe enough. He had clawed his way out of nothing, built a life for himself piece by piece. And now that he had something, they wanted to take it away? He wouldn't let them. The calls kept coming. His mother. His father. Even his brother, who hadn't spoken a single word to him in years. He ignored them all. Then came the messages. Don't be selfish. Family takes care of family. If you had any decency, you'd help your brother. You owe us for everything we did for you. The last one nearly made him laugh. What exactly had they done for him? Kick him out? Leave him stranded? Pretend he didn't exist? He deleted the messages. But they didn't stop. One evening, there was a knock on his door. His stomach twisted as he looked through the peephole. His mother stood there, her expression tight, her arms crossed over her chest. She had come in person. He considered ignoring her. Pretending he wasn't home. But no, he was done running. He took a steadying breath and opened the door. She didn't waste a second. Are you really going to let your own brother suffer? He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Are you really going to act like you care about me now? Her lips pressed into a thin line. I've always cared. He let out a humorless chuckle. That's funny, because I don't remember you caring when I was sleeping in my car. That's in the past. No, he said firmly. It's not. She sighed, shaking her head as if he was the difficult one. Look, your brother is in trouble. He made some bad decisions, and he needs a fresh start. You don't even need that house. You can find another place. His patience snapped. I worked for this. I suffered for this. I built this life with no help from any of you. And now you want to take it from me? Just like you took everything else? Her expression hardened. You're being cruel. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. No. You were cruel. I'm just finally standing up for myself. A long silence stretched between them. He saw it then, the realization in her eyes. The understanding that he wasn't the same desperate kid they had thrown away. He was stronger now. And he wasn't going to let them take anything from him ever again. She exhaled sharply and took a step back. You'll regret this. No, he said, meeting her gaze without fear. I won't. She left without another word. As the door clicked shut behind her, a strange sense of peace washed over him. For the first time in his life, he truly felt free. The silence in the house felt heavier than usual after his mother's visit. He had expected some sense of victory, some satisfaction in standing his ground. Instead, there was only a slow, creeping exhaustion settling into his bones. He had spent years running from his past, pretending it didn't matter. But now, with a few words and a visit, they had dragged him right back to the place he had fought so hard to escape. They wanted his house. After all these years, they still believed they had the right to take from him. His mother's words lingered in his mind like an echo, you'll regret this. But would he? He turned his phone over in his hands, hesitating. The messages had stopped for now, but he knew it was only a matter of time before they tried again. Would they show up at his workplace? Send someone else to convince him? Or would they try something worse? With a sharp exhale, he placed the phone face down on the table. He couldn't let himself spiral. Not again. He had survived worse. And for the first time in his life, he was going to choose himself. That night, sleep didn't come easy. His mind was a battlefield, warring between past and present. He remembered the last time he had felt like this, alone, unsure, and wondering what would come next. The night they had thrown him out was still a vivid, burning memory in his mind. It had been cold. Not freezing, but that kind of autumn chill that sank into your skin and made you feel unwelcome in the world. His father had stood in the doorway, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. His mother had been in the kitchen, pretending none of it was happening. And his brother? He had just watched. Not a word of protest. Not a hint of regret. Just watching. Like he had already decided that whatever was happening to him didn't matter. His father had spoken first. "It's time for you to learn how to survive on your own." He had been stunned. "Are you serious?" His voice had cracked with disbelief. His father had simply nodded toward the suitcase by the door. "We're not throwing you out for good," his mother had said, still not meeting his eyes. "But we think this is best for you." Best for him? He had barely been an adult, still figuring out who he was, what he wanted in life. He had no job, no savings, no plan. And yet, they had decided that tossing him out into the world with nothing was best for him? "Take the car," his father had said, as if that was some kind of mercy. "But don't expect anything else." His brother had smirked then, like it was all a joke. Like this was some kind of lesson he would thank them for later. He had wanted to fight. To scream. To beg. But he hadn't. Instead, he had taken his suitcase, walked to the car, and driven away. And no one had stopped him. No one had even looked back. He had spent that first night in a gas station parking lot, staring at his reflection in the rearview mirror, trying to understand how it had come to this. For months, he had barely scraped by. He had worked anywhere that would take him, washing dishes, cleaning floors, lifting boxes at the docks. And every night, when exhaustion settled into his bones, he wondered, was this the life they thought was best for me? There had been moments when he almost called them. When he almost caved, willing to say whatever they wanted to hear just to have a place to sleep that wasn't a car seat. But something inside him had stopped him every time. A voice that whispered, "They left you. They didn't care. So why should he care now?" Over the years, he had learned how to survive. He had climbed his way up, built something for himself out of the nothing they had left him with. The house had been his biggest victory. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't even particularly special. But it was his. A symbol of everything he had overcome. And now they wanted to take it. For the same brother who had watched him suffer and never once reached out. He clenched his fists against the table, forcing himself to breathe through the rage swelling in his chest. No. He wasn't that lost, desperate kid anymore. They had made their choices. And so had he. The next morning, the phone rang again. This time, it was his father. He let it ring out. Then another call. And another. By the fifth call, he finally answered. "What?" His voice was sharp, unyielding. A pause. Then his father's voice, rough and impatient. "Your mother told me about your conversation." "Did she?" He leaned against the counter, already tired of this. "And what exactly did she tell you?" "That you refused to help your family." He let out a slow breath, gripping the phone tighter. "Help? Is that what we're calling this? Because I seem to remember a time when my family didn't give a damn if I had a roof over my head." "Don't be dramatic," his father snapped. "You turned out fine, didn't you?" His stomach twisted. That same excuse. That same dismissal. Like all the suffering, all the nights spent wondering if he would make it to the next day, didn't count just because he had survived. "Did you ever stop to think about what that did to me?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "How much it hurt?" A long silence stretched between them. Then his father scoffed. "You're still holding on to that? It's been years. You're grown. Stop acting like a child." His jaw tightened. "I was a child when you did it." Another pause. Then his father exhaled sharply. "Look, we can go in circles all day, but this isn't about the past. This is about your brother." "No," he said firmly. "This is about you. About the fact that you only call me when you need something. You're overreacting. I don't think I am. He rubbed a hand over his face, already exhausted. I've spent years waiting for a single apology. A single moment of regret from either of you. His father didn't say anything. That's what I thought. There was a long silence. Then, his father's voice, colder than before. So you're really saying no? Yeah, he said, standing his ground. I am. His father exhaled through his nose, as if he had already expected this. Fine, he said. But don't expect us to be there when you need us. A humorless chuckle escaped him. Oh, I figured that out a long time ago. Without waiting for a reply, he hung up. And this time, he didn't feel regret. He didn't feel guilt. All he felt was relief. The past had shaped him, but it didn't define him anymore. He wasn't that scared kid in a car anymore. He had built a life, one they had no claim to. And no matter what they tried next, he wasn't going to let them take it from him. Not this time. Not ever again. The house was quiet, but his mind wasn't. After hanging up on his father, he expected some sense of finality, like closing a door on the past. Instead, a storm brewed inside him, restless and unrelenting. The past was no longer just haunting him, it was dragging him back in. His parents had never once asked about his life in all these years. Never checked on him. Never apologized. But now that his brother was in trouble, suddenly, they wanted to talk. Why? The obvious answer was entitlement. They had thrown him away like he was nothing, but now that he had something valuable, they felt it belonged to them. But something wasn't adding up. His mother's desperation. His father's sudden involvement. And most of all, why his brother needed the house so badly. His brother had always been their favorite. Spoiled, reckless, and yet somehow never responsible for his own mistakes. They had protected him, covered for him, and expected everyone else to do the same. So what had changed? Why were they this desperate now? His gut told him there was more to this. And for the first time in years, he needed answers. Digging for the truth, he didn't want to call them again. He knew the conversation would only end in frustration. Instead, he went to the only person who had ever given him bits and pieces of the truth, his aunt. She was the only one in the family who had ever shown him kindness, though she had never outright gone against his parents. She had called him a few times over the years, always vague, always careful, but there had been something in her tone, a quiet sadness, almost like guilt. Maybe she knew something. He scrolled through his phone and found her number. It had been months since they last spoke, but as soon as he hit call, she picked up almost immediately. Hello? Her voice was cautious, hesitant. Auntie, it's me. A beat of silence. Then, a deep sigh. I was wondering when you'd call. Something about her tone sent a chill down his spine. She knew. You heard about it already, didn't you? He asked. She exhaled. They've been talking about it for weeks. I told them to leave you alone. His grip on the phone tightened. Why do they need the house so badly? Another pause. Then, the words that sent his stomach plummeting. Your brother is in deep trouble. With people you don't want to mess with. The world tilted for a moment. What kind of trouble? I don't know the full details, she admitted. But it's bad. He owes a lot of money. And not to the kind of people who forget debts. His heart pounded. Of course. Of course, it wasn't just about needing a home. They wanted his house to bail his brother out. His parents had already given him everything else. And now, they wanted to strip away the only thing he had built for himself. What happens if he doesn't pay? He asked, his voice quieter now. Another long pause. Then, he could lose more than just money. His chest tightened. So that was it. They weren't just trying to save his brother. They were scared. And they were willing to sacrifice him to make the problem go away. Confronting the past, his hands were shaking as he drove. He hadn't planned to see them again so soon, but this wasn't something he could ignore. If they had been honest, if they had told him the truth from the beginning, would it have changed anything? Probably not. But the fact that they had lied, manipulated, and twisted the situation made it even worse. By the time he pulled up to his parents' house, his anger was burning just beneath the surface. The house was exactly as he remembered it. Too perfect, too pristine, like something out of a catalog. A home that had never truly felt like his. He didn't bother knocking. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. His mother and father were in the living room, their expressions shifting from surprise to something much colder. "You didn't answer my calls," his father said. His voice was steady, but his mother's hands were gripping the armrest of the couch a little too tightly. He ignored the comment and got straight to the point. "I talked to Auntie." That got their attention. His mother's face paled. His father's jaw tensed. "You should have come to us if you had questions," his father said stiffly. He let out a bitter laugh. "Why? So you could feed me another lie?" His mother sighed. "We didn't want to worry you." "You didn't want to worry me?" His voice rose. "Or you didn't want to admit that you're using me to clean up his mess?" His father's expression darkened. "Watch your tone." "Or what?" He took a step forward. "You'll kick me out again?" His mother flinched. His father exhaled sharply. "We were trying to do what's best for the family." "You mean what's best for him?" His voice was raw now. "It's always been about him." His mother finally spoke, her voice pleading. "He's in danger." "So was I." His voice cracked slightly, but he didn't care. "When you threw me out, I was in danger." "Did you care then?" She looked away. His father didn't speak. "That's what I thought," he said. A long silence stretched between them. Then, his mother whispered, "We're scared." For the first time, there was something real in her voice. Fear. Regret. Maybe even shame. But it wasn't enough. "I get it," he said quietly. "But I won't fix this for you." His mother closed her eyes. "So that's it?" "Yeah," he said, turning toward the door. "That's it." And for once, they didn't try to stop him. A brother's betrayal, he wasn't sure why he went to see his brother. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was a need for closure. Or maybe, deep down, he just wanted to hear his brother say something, anything, that would make him believe this family wasn't completely broken. But as soon as his brother opened the door, he knew he wasn't going to get that. His brother leaned against the doorframe, smirking slightly, as if this whole thing was nothing more than an inconvenience. "Well," he said. "That was dramatic." His stomach twisted. "You don't even care, do you?" His brother shrugged. "What do you want me to say?" "How about thank you?" His voice rose. "Or I'm sorry? Or maybe I understand why you don't want to throw away everything you've worked for?" His brother rolled his eyes. "Look, I get it. You're still bitter about the whole being kicked out thing." He felt his fists clench. "Bitter? You turned out fine," his brother said, repeating the same damn words their father had used. "Why are you still whining about it?" His anger turned cold. Deadly. He let out a slow breath. "You don't get it. You never did." His brother smirked. "No, I get it. You're mad because now you have something they actually want." His stomach sank. That was it. That was the truth. They had never cared. Not when he was struggling. Not when he was alone. Only when he had something they needed. His brother shrugged. "Either way, it doesn't matter. Mom and Dad will find a way to fix this." He let out a hollow laugh. "And you'll just keep screwing up, won't you?" His brother grinned. "Obviously." He took a step back. For the first time in his life, he saw his brother clearly. Not as family. Not as the golden child. Just a selfish, reckless man who had never faced consequences in his life. And he wasn't going to be part of that anymore. "I'm done," he said simply. His brother raised an eyebrow. "Done with what?" "With all of you." His brother's smirk faltered. "You don't mean that." But he did. For the first time in his life, he truly, completely meant it. Without another word, he turned and walked away. And he didn't look back. The drive back home felt longer than usual. His knuckles were white against the steering wheel, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. His brother's smug face lingered in his mind, the casual dismissal of everything he had been through. "You turned out fine. Why are you still whining about it?" They would never understand. They never wanted to understand. To them, he was nothing more than an inconvenience that had unexpectedly thrived. And now that he had something they needed, they had the audacity to expect him to just hand it over? Not this time. Not ever again. His phone buzzed on the passenger seat. Another call. Another attempt. He ignored it. Then, a message popped up. "Mom, you don't have to do this. We're still your family." A humorless laugh escaped his lips. Still his family? Where was family when he had been sleeping in his car, wondering if he would even make it to the next day? Where was family when he was picking up odd jobs, just to afford a meal? Where was family when they left him with nothing? He shut off his phone. No more. He wasn't playing their game anymore. The unexpected visitors, the knock came the next evening. He knew it would. His parents never took no for an answer. Not when it came to his brother. He took a deep breath, steadying himself, before opening the door. His mother stood there, arms crossed, her face twisted in frustration. His father was behind her, his usual unreadable expression in place. But it was his brother who caught his attention. He was there too, leaning against the porch railing like he had all the time in the world, wearing that same arrogant smirk. Like this was just another minor inconvenience. Like none of this really mattered to him. His mother spoke first. "We need to talk." He crossed his arms over his chest. "We already did." His father sighed, stepping forward. "Son, don't call me that." His voice was cold, sharper than he intended. "You lost that right a long time ago." A flicker of something, regret, anger, or maybe just annoyance, crossed his father's face, before he regained his composure. "This is getting out of hand," his mother said, exasperated. "You're making a big deal out of nothing." His patience snapped. "Nothing? You think this is nothing?" She pressed her lips into a thin line. "You're making this more difficult than it needs to be." "No," he said, voice steady, unwavering. "I'm making it clear that you don't get to use me anymore." His father inhaled deeply, the way he always did when trying to keep control of a situation. "Let's not be dramatic. We raised you, you threw me out," he interrupted. "That's what you did." His mother shook her head. "That was a long time ago. And yet, it seems to only matter now that you need something from me." "We're your family," his father said, voice low, warning. "That should mean something to you." He let out a bitter chuckle. "Funny. It didn't seem to mean much to you when I was the one who needed help." His mother's expression hardened. "We did what was best for you." "No, you did what was easiest for you," he corrected. "And now that you need something, you suddenly remember I exist?" His brother finally spoke, stepping forward with an exaggerated sigh. "Look, can we stop all this emotional nonsense? Let's just get to the point." He turned toward his brother, eyes narrowing. "Oh, by all means, let's." His brother smirked. "You have a house. I need a house. It's not that complicated." His fists clenched at his sides. "You need it? Or you need to hide in it?" His brother's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something behind his eyes, annoyance. Maybe even a little fear. He had hit a nerve. Your problems are not my responsibility, he continued, stepping forward. I'm not your safety net. His brother scoffed. You're being selfish. He laughed, an actual laugh this time, but it was hollow, humorless. Selfish? You're standing here demanding I give you my home because you screwed up, and I'm the selfish one? You're acting like I'm asking for your kidney, his brother said, rolling his eyes. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. It's not just a house. It's my house. It's everything I worked for. Everything you and Mom and Dad left me with nothing to build. His brother's smirk faltered for just a second. Then, with a shrug, he muttered, guess I should have worked harder on making them like me less. That was it. That was the truth. His brother knew he had been the golden child. Knew he had been handed everything. And he wasn't even sorry for it. His stomach twisted. He had spent years wondering if maybe, just maybe, his family hadn't understood what they had done to him. If maybe they didn't realize how much it had broken him. But they knew. They had always known. And they didn't care. Something inside him clicked into place, and suddenly, the anger was gone. There was nothing left but exhaustion. You know what? His voice was quiet now, calmer than he expected. I don't need this. Any of this. His mother frowned. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm done, he said simply. With all of you. His father scoffed. Don't be ridiculous. But he wasn't being ridiculous. For the first time in his life, he saw things clearly. His parents didn't love him the way parents should. His brother had never been his friend, never cared about him beyond what he could offer. This wasn't a family. It was just a broken house, held together by guilt and obligation. And he was done trying to live in it. I want you to leave, he said, stepping back toward the door. His mother's face crumpled in shock. You can't mean that. But he did. His father's expression turned cold. If you do this, you're done with this family. He met his father's gaze without hesitation. I was done the moment you turned your back on me. His father clenched his jaw. His mother's eyes shimmered with tears, though whether they were from sadness or anger, he didn't know. His brother? He just looked annoyed. Fine, his brother muttered. I'll find another way. His mother turned toward him, one last desperate attempt. You'll regret this. He exhaled sharply. No, he said. I won't. And for the first time, he truly believed it. He stepped back inside and shut the door. And this time, he locked it. Aftermath, the silence was overwhelming. He stood there for a long time, listening, waiting, half expecting them to knock again, to beg, to push, to try one last time. But they didn't. For the first time in his life, they had hurt him. And they had left. His shoulders slumped, the weight of years of pain and frustration suddenly lifting. He had won. Not by proving them wrong. Not by making them apologize. But by walking away. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling. It felt different. Lighter. Like he had finally cut the last thread tethering him to a past he no longer belonged to. His phone buzzed again. A text. Auntie, proud of you. A small smile tugged at his lips. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't scared of what came next. Because whatever it was his. And no one was ever going to take that from him again. The silence in the house was thick, but it wasn't the suffocating kind he had once known. It was peaceful. For the first time in his life, he had drawn a line, and they had no choice but to accept it. And yet, despite the clarity of his decision, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered, what if they come back? What if they try something worse? He shook his head. No. They wouldn't. He had made himself clear. Hadn't he? The final push, the calls didn't stop. He should have expected it. Even after shutting the door in their faces, they weren't going to give up that easily. His phone buzzed on the table again. Another call from his mother. Then a text. "Mom, talk to me. Please." He clenched his jaw, glaring at the screen. She didn't say "I'm sorry." She didn't say "I understand." She said "talk to me." Like nothing had happened. Like he was still the one expected to fix everything. Another buzz. This time, from an unknown number. His stomach twisted. Something told him he shouldn't answer. That it wasn't worth it. But curiosity won. He picked up. A familiar voice came through, casual and smug. "Come on, man. We both know you're not gonna keep this up forever." His brother. His grip on the phone tightened. "What do you want?" A chuckle. "Relax. Just wanted to have a little chat. No parents involved this time. Make it quick." Another laugh, as if none of this was serious. "You really think you can just cut us off like that?" "I don't think," he said evenly. "I know." His brother let out a low whistle. "Damn. Cold." Silence stretched between them. Then, his brother's voice shifted, lower, darker. "You should have just given me the house, man. Would have saved everyone a lot of trouble." His stomach dropped. A warning. A threat. He exhaled slowly. "Are you actually threatening me?" A scoff. "No, no, no. Not threatening. Just saying, you might want to rethink this. You never know when things can change." His jaw clenched. "You really haven't changed at all, have you?" A pause. Then, his brother sighed dramatically. "All right, fine. You win. Keep your stupid house." The call ended. He stared at the screen, heart pounding. It wasn't over. Not yet. Breaking the cycle, he didn't trust it. His brother had never backed down easily. Neither had his parents. For years, they had controlled him through guilt, shame, and manipulation. And now, for the first time, he had power. Not over them. But over himself. He wasn't going to let them make him second-guess his choices. So he took another step. He blocked their numbers. One by one. His father. His mother. His brother. And just like that. Silence. Real silence. It should have felt empty. Instead, it felt like freedom. The unexpected visitor. 2 days passed. No calls. No texts. No knocks on his door. For the first time in years, he slept through the night without a single thought of them. Then, on the 3rd day, someone knocked. His stomach tightened. He checked the peephole. It wasn't his parents. It wasn't his brother. It was his aunt. He hesitated for only a second before opening the door. She smiled softly, her hands tucked into her coat pockets. "Hey, kid." He let out a slow breath. "Hey." A pause. "Can I come in?" she asked. He nodded. A different kind of conversation. They sat in the living room, the tension between them lighter than he expected. His aunt glanced around, nodding approvingly. "Nice place." He chuckled. "Thanks." She studied him for a moment, then sighed. "They're furious, you know." His lips twitched. "I figured. They think you'll change your mind." He met her gaze. "I won't." She smiled, something small, something proud. "Good." Another pause. Then, she shifted in her seat, expression softening. "You did the right thing." His chest tightened. For so long, he had fought against guilt. Against the idea that he owed his family something. But now, someone from the family was telling him he was right. It felt strange. Validating. Like he wasn't just imagining the injustice of it all. They'll come up with something else, she warned. They always do. I know. She nodded. Then, I guess there's only one thing left to say. He tilted his head. What's that? She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. Are you ready to let go? His breath hitched. Let go? Wasn't that what he had already done? Blocking them. Cutting them off. But something about her question made him realize he had physically separated himself from them. But he was still carrying the anger. The pain. That weight sat on his chest, pressing down, holding him back. He had survived. He had won. But he had never really healed. Was he ready for that? Could he forgive? Not for them. But for himself? A new chapter that night, he stood outside on the porch, staring up at the sky. For years, he had been running. Trying to prove he was enough, trying to prove he was worth something, despite what they had done to him. But standing there now, in his own home, in his own space, he realized. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. His success wasn't about them. It was about him. His life. His choices. His future. And for the first time in his life, he felt free. The anger was still there. The hurt wouldn't disappear overnight. But maybe, just maybe, he was ready to let go. Not for them. But for himself. The days that followed were eerily quiet. For the first time in years, he wasn't expecting a call that would drain the life out of him. No texts filled with guilt, no manipulative messages about family sticking together. It should have felt lonely. But it didn't. Instead, it felt like freedom. The weight that had pressed on his chest for so long was lighter now. Not gone. Not yet. But lighter. The guilt that never goes away. He knew that cutting off toxic people, even family, was the right decision. But that didn't mean the guilt disappeared overnight. Late at night, when the house was quiet and his mind wandered, doubt crept in. Had he gone too far? Had he really done the right thing? The worst part wasn't the silence. It was the memories. Flashes of childhood, of moments that had felt real, before things had turned cold. Christmas mornings when he and his brother had laughed as they ripped open presents. His mother's gentle hands tending to his scraped knee when he fell off his bike. His father clapping him on the back after his first school award. Were those moments lies? Or were they just buried beneath the hurt? He didn't know. And maybe he never would. But one thing was certain, he couldn't keep carrying the past like a chain around his neck. It was time to move forward. A new routine. He threw himself into his work. He took morning jogs, something he had neglected for months. He started focusing on his life, rather than the one they had tried to force him into. For the first time, he wasn't looking over his shoulder, waiting for the next blow to land. He didn't need to check his phone every few minutes, expecting an attack disguised as concern. The world felt new. Like he had been living in a cage, and now, finally, he had stepped outside. A message from the past. Then, one evening, something unexpected happened. His phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. He hesitated. Then read it. Brother, I hope you're happy. You finally got what you wanted. His stomach twisted. Even now, his brother refused to acknowledge what had happened. It was always about him. Not an apology. Not a moment of understanding. Just more blame. More entitlement. He stared at the message for a long time. Then, slowly, he typed out a response. I didn't win anything. I just stopped playing your game. Then, before he could overthink it, he blocked the number. And just like that, the last thread tying him to his past was cut. A chance encounter. Weeks passed. One afternoon, while grabbing coffee at a local cafe, he ran into someone he never expected to see again. His brother's ex-girlfriend. She spotted him first, her eyes widening slightly. Then, cautiously, she approached. "I wasn't sure if I should say hi," she admitted. He gestured to the empty seat at his table. "Go ahead." She hesitated, then sat. "I heard what happened," she said after a moment. He raised an eyebrow. "Which part?" A sad smile. "All of it." He nodded. "Figures." She sipped her coffee, studying him. "I'm surprised they didn't find a way to drag you back in." He smirked. "They tried." She chuckled. "Yeah. They always do." Silence stretched between them. Then, she sighed. "I should have left sooner, you know? Your family, they don't care about anyone but themselves." He exhaled slowly. "Yeah. I know." She set her cup down. "I don't know if this means anything to you, but I think you did the right thing." Something inside him eased. "Thanks," he said. She gave him a small smile. "You ever think about leaving town?" The question caught him off guard. "Leaving?" She shrugged. "Fresh start. New place. No memories of them." The idea was tempting. He had built his life without them, but this town still carried ghosts. Would it be better to start somewhere else? For the first time, he considered it. A new beginning? That night, he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The idea wouldn't leave his mind. A fresh start. A place where he didn't have to worry about running into old shadows. He had been so focused on breaking free that he hadn't thought about what came after. Was this it? Was this where he was supposed to stay? Or was there something more out there for him? The thought excited him. Scared him. But for the first time in his life, the fear wasn't paralyzing. It was thrilling. Because for the first time ever, his future was his own. And that? That was freedom. The idea wouldn't leave his mind. A fresh start. A city where no one knew his name. No painful memories lurking in every corner. For years, he had been trapped in the cycle of his family's games, twisting, manipulating, controlling. And even after cutting them off, there was something unfinished. Like a book with its last page missing. Because the truth was, even though he had walked away, he was still here. In the same town. In the same house. Surrounded by ghosts of his past. And for the first time, he wondered, did he really want to stay? Or was this his chance to finally move on? One last visit, the next morning, he drove to the one place he had avoided for years. The old family house. Not to see them. Not to talk. But to say goodbye, in his own way. His parents weren't home. He had checked. He knew their routines, their habits. As he stood outside, staring up at the house he had once called home, something inside him felt hollow. This place had been his prison once. The place where he had learned that love was conditional. Where he had learned that he was disposable. And yet, there had been good memories too. Laughter at the dinner table. Late-night movies. The backyard swing where he used to dream about what his life would be like one day. He had spent years trying to erase it all, to convince himself that none of it had mattered. But the truth was, it had mattered. It had shaped him. The pain. The abandonment. The loneliness. It had all led him here. To this moment. To this choice. The house that built him. He took a deep breath. And for the first time, he let it go. Not just the anger, not just the pain. But the need for closure that would never come. His parents would never apologize. His brother would never change. He had spent too much time waiting for something that would never happen. And he was done waiting. He turned away from the house, and this time, he didn't look back. Selling the past, that night, he made a decision. The house, his house, had been his greatest victory. Proof that he had survived. That he had built something from nothing. But now? Now it felt like a weight. A symbol of what he had overcome, but also a reminder of the struggle it took to get here. He didn't want to live in the past anymore. So he called a real estate agent. The house was going up for sale. And once it sold, he was leaving. For good. The final goodbye. The day he left, the town felt smaller than it ever had before. For years, it had been his whole world. But standing at the edge of it now, suitcase in hand, he realized it was just another dot on the map. And the world beyond it? Limitless. His phone buzzed. A text. From his aunt. "Auntie, proud of you." He smiled. Then turned off his phone. Not because he was running. But because, for the first time, he was moving towards something, not away from it. A life lesson worth remembering. As the plane took off, he stared out the window, watching the town fade into the distance. A single thought crossed his mind. One that had taken years to understand. Sometimes, the best way to win is to walk away. Because real strength isn't about proving yourself to the people who refuse to see your worth. It's about knowing your own worth, and refusing to let anyone take it away. And with that thought, he smiled. Because for the first time in his life, he was truly, completely free.